Well, let's get started. Good morning, and thank you for coming. Welcome. My name is Dan Quinn, and I head up the Development and Consulting Group for Colliers. I'd also like to just introduce two of my partners. One is Richard Barnett, who put this program together for us today, and the other one is Mike Solak, that heads up our project management group. More importantly, today's panel, and we think we have a great panel for you all. I'll just quickly go down from your right, and we have Pete Hamill, who's the Vice President, General Manager of Turner Construction's Boston office. He oversees $800 million of work annually in the New England region. Turner ranks first or second in major segments of the construction industry and maintains a nationwide network of offices and a staff of more than 5,000 employees. Next to him, we have our moderator today. Excuse me, we have Bernita Beikmann, who gets the award for coming to visit us from Dallas, Texas today. She's a principal with the architectural firm HKS in their Dallas office and is the Director of Lean Strategy for their healthcare group. The last 6 years, her work has been focused on IPD and lean project improvement on projects with the various teams. She's a successful advocate for lean planning, design, and construction. Next, we have our moderator for today, Hal Macomber. He's the principal of Lean Project Consulting, Inc. He focuses on project leadership and organizational transformation in a lean environment with special attention to IPD. In the last 2 years, Hal and his team of project coaches have advised and coached 24 IPD projects. Next, we have Stephen Spear. No, we don't. We have John Messervy. I'll get this right. Trust me. It's water.
You wouldn't want to be me.
John, who most of you know, is an architect and the Director of Capital and Facilities Planning for Partners Healthcare Boston. Partners is a 13-hospital network that includes the Mass General and Brigham and Women's Hospital. He's responsible for Partners' multi-year facility planning program and large-scale construction projects. Finally, we have Stephen Spear, who is a senior lecturer at MIT, senior fellow at the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, and author of The High Velocity Edge that many of us have read. His research focuses on how certain organizations deliver far more value to the market at greater speed and with greater ease than their counterparts by generating and sustaining high-speed learning loops that are the engines for improvements and innovation. So, you all have more extensive bios in the handout, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hal, and we'll get started.
Great, thanks. So, John, we're going to start with you. This is your third year at this, being a panelist here.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Thank you.
Forget? So, your RFPs, John, have been calling for lean design and lean construction. You've gone so far as to say in the RFP for the NICU that the designers shall select their consultants on a CBA basis. There's nobody that appears more committed to this than you. Why so much commitment, and what are you seeing as a result of it?
I'm seeing teamwork, I'm seeing productivity and efficiency, and I'm seeing cost savings. And I'm also seeing that the CBA process in particular, choosing by advantage, is being embedded inside our organization, not only within the planning and design components of our organization, but in senior management levels of organization too. For instance, I'm planning a CBA session with one of our boards of trustees in a couple of weeks to help them narrow down the choices they have around different building options for a new hospital. So it's really becoming embedded in the way we do decision making. I think obviously I think this has been known for many years. It's not new, but if you get the brief right at the beginning, then you have a much better chance of being effective and efficient and producing the project on budget and on schedule. So CBA, in my mind, really helps focus the discussion at the outset and highlight the critical issues, the critical problems, the challenges, the criteria, basically. for the project. It also helps us differentiate amongst the competitors when we're doing a competitive selection process, whether it's architect or contractor. You know, what are the distinguishing differences and critical differences, important differences between the teams? And so I think, as you know, we've run selection processes for the past 20 years that ranked by technical proposal before we considered price. I think the CBA is really an evolution of that, and we're not excluding cost from the consideration, but it's certainly not necessarily the most important consideration in every project we do. So CBA has been really sort of transformative in the way we think about the approach to our projects, and in building consensus around exactly what it is that we're trying to create and accomplish with these projects as we get them going.
Could you say a little bit more about the lean practices that you're expecting on your projects?
Yeah, you know, we've applied it to our large projects, and by that I mean I think the smallest project we're applying it to is a $12 million addition renovation out at McLean Hospital, and the largest project is probably the, not probably, it is the Brigham Building for the Future, which is under construction now, which is $330 million, excuse me, construction. And, you know, same processes work in both environments. The other components that we're really dependent on is the total target value design that has worked extremely well on our three most recent projects: the Brigham, the data center that we just finished constructing, $90 million data center out in Marlborough, and on the NICU project that is being constructed now over at Brigham and Women's. So TVD is really critical, and I can say more about that down the road. And then, of course, the pool planning component of scheduling the work, not only on the construction side, but on the design side, to get the work integrated, the various streams integrated so that we have an efficient delivery process at the outset, and that, again, the scope is understood, the pricing is understood, the schedule is understood. The pool planning, for me, is all about saving time, and there may be other folks who talk about it in different ways, but my experience is that it can save significant amounts of time through that collaborative process.
Thanks. Bernita, more and more your clients are, this countrywide, they're engaging you for lean IPD projects. What compels them to do so?
I think there's multiple reasons. Most commonly, it's because they've had a bad experience with a traditional project, whether in terms of behavior or outcomes. They don't always get the results that they want, or even the process is difficult or more difficult than it needs to be. Some of them because they're actually doing lean internally with their operations and find out that, oh, this lean works not just internally, it also works with projects that I do with capital projects going forward. And sometimes it's people coming to things like this, that they hear about it, they read about it, and they hear great results stories of how lean really changed, improved the value on their projects, or their projects got finished faster, or their projects were completed for less money, or all the success stories that they hear, and they get interested and start asking questions.
So what are the practices that your clients most appreciate? What's producing most value for them?
You know, just specifically in design, our focus tends to be changed when you're doing lean design as opposed to traditional. It's, you know, architects are trained to be problem solvers, and lean really wants us to think about root causes of problems before we solve it, which is very difficult for an architect to do because we want to rush in there immediately and solve everyone's problem, and oftentimes don't even figure out what the problem is. So lean actually forces us to take a step back and say, client, end user, customer, what's going on here? What's going on with your facility? How can we make your facility better? And how can we make your facility better in the future? Also, just, you know, the pool planning conversation is just to add on that, yeah, it changes it allows you to shorten schedule, but I think for the first time it allows every participant on the team, including the owner, to have a conversation about what all that stuff means. Why do they need to make decisions on a certain day? What's the impact of those decisions? How can we give them the information they need in order to make that decision, which is something that on traditional jobs you don't talk about. You just say, here's the stuff, decide this now. And don't always get to have the opportunity to have the conversation on why you need to make that decision, why it's important, and what the impacts. And I think that's pretty powerful.
Are you putting the decisions on the pull plan?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a big shift. Mm-hmm. If you can see the decisions coming, then you can be ready as opposed to be surprised by it.
Right.
Yeah. Great. Pete, nationwide, Turner is involved in many lean and lean IPD projects. How are those projects different from those not pursued on a lean basis?
Well, Hal, I guess I'll start with a story. We all, quite a few baby boomers in the room, and we all sort of maybe grew up with the Britannica Encyclopedia. Remember that book, or the Hostess series of books, 32 volumes, all over the kitchen table? That was sort of our conduit for education growing up. And back in '94, Encarta came out, Microsoft, and they put all those 32 or 34 editions into 2 discs. Remember that? And then 10 years later, this thing called Wiki came out. And 5 years later, Britannica published the last edition, 35,000 pages compared to 37 million articles within Wiki. I say that because it's continuous improvement, and that's what our organization has grasped over the last 3 or 4 years. It's how do you not become commoditized? I'm relatively new in my chair, and that's what I think about all day, every day. I see Richie here, I see a couple guys from Suffolk here. How do you stay at their level or better than them every day? And that's continuous improvement. So the way I do it locally, and I'm going to go a little rogue for a moment, is I got a technical group, I've got a lean group, and then I've got what I call a leaning forward group that is chaired by a kid that's 6, 7 years in the industry, and he's just taking all the knowledge from the millennials that just want to share stuff with the upper management. And they're bringing it all to one central core that's sort of tied to my key executive group. And we vet thoughts and processes all in a lean type environment, and then push them out to the jobs, where the jobs are pulling them back into their environments. It's called continuous improvement. So if you look at, for today, and today's discussion, lean, lean is a mindset. It just simply says, how do you make the process better? Continuous improvement. Eisenhower said, I just heard this last week, I think it's a great little 3 words, adaptability beats efficiency. I used to pride myself on being efficient all day, every day. I live that all day, every day. He says, adapt to change. That beats efficiency. That's pretty powerful. That's what lean's all about. So for me, lean is about providing better value, providing more predictability. And as a business, Hal, what we've sort of come together on is 2 concepts. One is target value design, second is last planner. And within those, you've got the A3s, the constraint logs, and all of that. But those are the 2 focus points for our organization. And we build every project today, $25 million, $250 million, $500 million with that lean approach. I'll also share one other thing. I think the secret to lean, and I'd like to actually hear maybe from the panel a little bit, is it's not driven by me. It's not driven by the design group, Bernita and their team. It's actually driven by the ownership, by the John Messervys of the world. If the ownership is not truly and genuine to the lean approach of their project, 9 out of 10 times it doesn't work. It's not like BIM. BIM, I can drive BIM. Bernita and the design team can drive BIM. BIM revolutionized our industry 10 years ago. 2005 is when it was brought to this. Matter of fact, John Messervy brought it to this region, in 2005. We learned from that. Lean's the next principle for us. That's going to make us, again, it's going to take us one step beyond from where we are today. And I think the secret there is I can't drive that. Designers can't drive that. It's got to be driven by the ownership.
So let me give you another shot at the question. So how are the projects that you're doing lean different from the other projects that you're doing? Because I mean, locally, you have sort of made that switch, but nationally, you can go to places like, they don't want to talk to you about lean. Right?
Yeah.
So how are those projects different for you?
Again, you know, I think one of the things that we all take pride in is predictability. And I think where you exercise a lean principle in the delivery of that project, you provide an exponential amount of predictability. And with predictability comes value. You know, can you put a dollar value around that value? That's hard to do. That's what we're all trying to figure out. But what I can tell you is, at the end of the day, you know, we're timely and we're delivering more value than we did on a project that wasn't exercised in lean principles.
Okay, thanks. So Steve, your book, The High Velocity Edge, is referenced all the time. And people talk about the 4 capabilities. Lean firms, lean project teams talk about the 4 capabilities all the time. The other day you were saying to me that the one thing that this industry needs is for designers and builders early on to entertain more options. What's behind that statement?
Yeah, so folks are probably looking at the dude from MIT wearing a bow tie and thinking, oh man, he's going to fall back and say it's all about learning. It's all about learning.
Well, thanks for being predictable.
Well, to the predictability part, right?
Yeah.
So what I mean by this is that anytime you start your work, and it doesn't matter whether you're first trying to figure out what the customer or the client needs, whether you're creating a design, starting the build phase, or running a facility, when you're starting out, what you know is, first of all, it's not enough. And the second part is it's not all there is to know. And by the time you're done with whatever phase it is, what you need to know is a whole lot more so that it's enough to be successful. And so how do you close the gap between you don't know enough and you know more than enough? Well, that's learning. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So my wife Miriam is an architect, and a bunch of years ago she designed a synagogue. And let me get to the end point first, and then I'll tell you how she get to that end point. And again, the theme has to be learning. So when the project is done, after the ribbon cutting, this big bouquet from Winston shows up on our front porch. And I look at the card. I'm trying to actually replace the card with, you know, love Steve, right? But she caught me at that. And the card is from the contractor. And in it says, Dear Miriam, it was really great working with you. And P.S., and this is on, flip over the card, says, at the end of a project, not only do I never send flowers to the architect, I actually never want to talk to her again. So that was one part. And then when we're walking around town and we meet people who attend the synagogue, people will come up. They don't know me, but then I introduce myself as the husband of the architect. Says, give my thanks to your wife. I've never been closer to God. And I hear that quote all the time. So you start thinking about the start point on that, which is she didn't know about how to design a synagogue. She didn't know the particular needs of this congregation. So how did she close the gap between that and getting flowers from the contractor and praise from the congregants? Well, it was relentless learning. So she goes out and she's sketching a lot. And then after a lot of sketching, she's showing the sketching to the client. And then after the sketching and entertaining a whole lot of options, do you want it this way, this way, this way, this way? Let's look at all of those. Then there's the mock-ups. I mean, the amount of cardboard scrap we have in our dining room at any given moment, you know, and say, well, do you like it this way? Do you like it this way? Do you like it this way? How do you like the orientation? And then after the mock-up, then there's the walkthroughs. And if it's not a walkthrough through something virtual like this or through a sketch, it's, well, why don't we go look at this place, or this place? And the idea is that by entertaining a whole lot of alternatives early, it expands your brain space in terms of what the set of possibilities are. And the thing that always comes out of this is that it's not that you entertain a lot of alternatives, you know, sort of think about a funnel going this way, and you run out 10 alternatives, and it's this one which succeeds at the end. It's that you entertain this one, you entertain this one, and they both fault out for some reason, but each informs the other, and then they advance and advance and advance. And it's that issue of just relentlessness of testing, trialing, experimenting, which proved to be the success there. And then just to tie this up, I mean, it works everywhere. So we did work with Pratt & Whitney. Now, the big expensive stuff they build moves as opposed to the big expensive stuff you guys build, which shouldn't. But it's still big expensive stuff, thousands of engineering, years involved, billions of dollars just to get to the first prototype. And when Pratt started this relentlessness around experimentation, and again, not just the engine itself, but how the work of designing the engine was done, they were able to take a design cycle time, which typically ran 4 years, got it down to 3. And in construction, you'll appreciate this, their engineering change orders, because on contract, that's where it make a lot of money. They cut in half the engineering change orders, and after losing a series of contests for military and commercial jets, they won the contract on the F-35 program, which is the largest weapons platform in history. So again, the issue here of how to converge towards, we have a design the user wants to actually use and enjoy. We have a design the contractor can put up, and then the user at the end can use efficiently, effectively, and all that. It's all about learning, and the learning comes through relentlessness in terms of number of alternatives and number of learning cycles, and especially early on.
So the practice you're talking about is called concurrent set-based design. It's been widely adopted in the lean design community. And the consequence of that is, I'll use your project in Somerville as an example, John. When that project started, we considered 7 different building frames, 3 different approaches to the building envelope, and 4 different ways of heating and cooling the building. Well, that's 84 distinct options. And yet we cut through that very quickly, like in a matter of 6 weeks, and didn't waver.
Right. Didn't go back.
We never had to revisit that.
Yeah.
So the practice was target value design, choosing by advantages. So I'm going to put Bernita on the spot. So you've been doing this for a while.
Yes.
Quite a while.
Yes.
So explain a little bit about how that process works and how you're challenged when you're doing it.
So target value design actually, it allows you to look at the building in a different way. For those of you not familiar with it, I will give you the very, very short, not MIT, but Kansas State version of what that is. It's you take the building that you're trying to construct and you break it into components. And most often those components are different components in the building. Sometimes you might put initiatives also as one of your frequently called cluster groups, where you might look at, say, your mechanical system separately, your structural system separately, your site separately. Maybe you have sustainability initiatives, you're going to look at them separately. But you don't create a silo team to do that, you create a cross-functional team. So you might have an interior designer in the group looking at mechanical systems. And why would you do that? Because you want to challenge the group. You want them to ask questions that they've never been asked before. You want them to come up with opportunities and solutions that they've never talked about before. And that allows you to start coming up with different options. You have different people on the team that maybe haven't worked on a healthcare project, or they've worked on a healthcare project, but they've also worked on a sports project, or they've worked on a project in Europe. But they can offer ideas that, if I've been doing an acute care hospital in the same size for the last 20 years, I might think I have the solution that works, and that's the right solution. It really encourages and challenges that team. The target part of it, which is really challenging the cost often and trying to increase quality, each one of those different people that's in that group has a different impression of what cost is. And often they don't have the entire story. So I might understand what the cost is of a particular item that I put in a specification. I might understand the initial product cost. I don't understand the labor cost, and I don't understand the labor cost of the person that comes behind the person that installs that product. So when you start getting those different cluster group teams together, you really start to get a handle of what real costs are in a way that you don't in a traditional project setup. And you start to see savings not just in terms of how much your mechanical system costs, but what effect that has to your drywall costs based on the systems that you select. So you have a lot more intimate conversations. You have a lot better cross-functional conversations about all the different component parts on the team. And you're able to run through those solutions fairly quickly, using A3s as a problem-solving tool with that, using CBA as a decision-making system with those different alternatives allows you actually in a very short period of time to not just run through options, but you're basically creating a database for yourself to reference in the future. So 6 months after your building open and your boss comes to you and say, I can't believe you put X, Y, or Z system in this project, you can hold up and say, this is why we put X, Y, or Z system in this project, because it made the most sense for us now and going forward. So I think it just kind of wraps everything up in the end.
Yeah, one of the things that both of you have talked about is the durability of the decisions you make. And imagine, I mean, you're picking a building frame, you're picking the envelope in the case in Somerville, the heating system. And you did all of that in the first 6 weeks, and you never had to look back and second guess, right? Is that the same?
Yeah, because you're looking at all available alternative of options, and you're crossing them out based on criteria you set forth in the beginning of the project, whether that criteria is long-term energy use or capital costs or whatever that criteria is.
Right, right. So I'm going to shift a little here. Pete, you were talking about the change that you've gone through. You shared with me earlier that you were a really good contractor. You drove hard on schedule and you drove hard on cost. And now that's changed.
That has changed.
Speak to that.
Yeah.
You mean you don't care anymore?
John, for you, I always care. You know, there was a day, though, John, that I would come to you and I would tell you that, you know, you give me the job and I'll find a way to do it for, instead of $600 a square foot, I'll do it for $550. You know, 8–10% cheaper than my competition. And the optimal word there is cheaper. And what we've come to appreciate as an organization, what I've come to appreciate as a builder, and it's primarily because of, you know, this tool called target value design, is that that's not just my job. My job used to be delivering on time, delivering for a budget, GMP, and then the job itself. And you know, 2 years later, the job would be delivered, and you walk through the door and you say, oh man, that metal panel should have been, you know, that should have been stone, and that terrazzo should have been, you know, that carpet tile should have been terrazzo. And I did that. I value engineered that out to get that 8 to 10%. And that's not my job. My job is to help the design team, the ownership, make smart decisions during the pre-construction effort, where we balance time and dollars, which used to always be just time and dollars, but now we're balancing it with program and design. That's an effective process. That's an effective good builder in my eyes. That's what we're, you know, playing for now in our role in pre-construction. It's not just time and dollars and getting it cheap and getting it fast. It's balancing those two pieces with, you know, a program that works not just on day one, but for the life of the building, and a design that you're proud of. I go back to the London. The London's 4 years old today, and I was proud of it when we turned this $350 million clinical facility over to Mass General the day we did it in 2011. I'm more proud of that facility today because the quality of the building is standing, you know, it's making its test of time. And I walk through the space, and the clinicians and nurses are talking about programmatically how well it's functioning. That's fantastic. My friends are talking about how wonderful a facility is actually to visit and to utilize. That's success. And I think we were part of that.
So John, your most recent completed lane project is the data center in Marlboro. Want to tell the group about that?
Yeah, it's one of these projects that went through various cycles of redesign for a number of different reasons. It's basically what we were attempting to do was to create a second data center, essentially a disaster recovery data center for Partners Healthcare. We already have one out in Needham. This one is out in Marlboro. And if we lost one data center, then the other data center would be, the data is fed synchronously to both data centers in real time. So as you all know, we're very dependent on electronic medical records and imaging these days. And if we don't have access to electronic medical images and data, then we're in difficult shape to deliver responsive services to patients. So, so the decision was made, and it was a very tough decision because it was penciling out at $90 million. It's, you know, it's really one of those back of the house kinds of things, and you know, lots of questions. Can't you do this in the cloud? Can't you do this? Can't you do that? And at the end of the day, because of concerns about confidentiality of patient information and other kinds of things, we really decided we needed to have this data under our own control and not have it floating out on Google or Amazon or anywhere else. I mean, we may get to that place with those clouds, but we're not there today. So, you know, there was an extensive site search. Over 50 sites were looked at. We needed it to be in a different region to be on a different electrical grid. We obviously needed it to be away from the coast. And we found a site, and we got 2/3 through design and discovered a pretty significant problem with the site, which really precluded our building on it. So we had to go look for another site. All in all, this took 4 years of design, is the short point here. And we did not apply lean processes to the design because I'd heard about lean, but I wasn't committed to lean at that point. So it was done through a traditional design process, although we did select Turner as the CM early on. And you know, it was one of these projects where Pete would call and say, you know, is this project ever going to happen, John? Because I'm spending a lot of time on pre-construction services, and I gave you a pretty aggressive price on pre-construction services. So is this ever going to happen? And it did happen. But the interesting thing is, we applied lean for the construction phase. And you know, it was transformational. What was an 18-month project initially became a 14-month project because of the full planning processes that were being used on a weekly basis involving the subs. And the most remarkable thing, and it's unheard of, and I have never done this before, we returned every penny of the contingency. Now, that's not to say we didn't spend contingency, but we found money during the course of the construction, working, again, as a team, designer and contractor, to return funds. And it's a bad precedent to set for my CFO, because it's his project, you know, unlike the hospital projects where we're working for somebody at the hospital, we're working for the CFO here. And so, you know, his obvious point is, well, you apply the right process. I can just give you money with no contingency, capital with no contingency, and you can get it done, right, John? And so that's the immediate battle. But anyway, point is, and I give Pete and his team a lot of credit for this. They really managed it very well. So you don't, I mean, ideally you do it in design. But if you don't do it in design, you can still do it during the construction phase, and you can still see significant savings in time and money, and you can still pull the team together into that process. So it's been a very successful project. We're just actually loading, Brigham's going live next week with their new Epic system, so that'll be the first full test of that data center.
Pete, do you want to comment on anything special on that project?
No, I think for us it was early on in our adoption of lean practices, and as John suggested, what was fantastic about the project was we didn't apply them during the design phase, but we quickly learned that we could actually manipulate the design, you know, post-design, and eventually, you know, find the absolute value for the job, what made the most sense for this specific job. And we made changes during the construction cycle of the job that I think proved to be both beneficial programmatically, but also on the dollar side at the end of the day.
You know, Bernita reminded me, said, well, that's money, if you'd done it during the design, that's money you could reapply to other aspects of the design, and that's absolutely true. In this instance, we just wanted to get this thing built for the least possible cost. We weren't looking to spend every penny we had in the budget. So, but obviously, if you can identify savings and keep to the target value design all the way through, and we've had projects where that's been very successful, you can reallocate funds during design or even early into construction, which add value to the project.
So Bernita, would you talk about one of your recently completed healthcare projects, and in particular give focus to what was it that drove value for the client?
So last week, a project in Akron, Ohio just opened, the Akron Children's Hospital project. We did a 2-day retrospective with the team, talking about the successes of that project. And the challenges with that specific project is that we started with the amount of requested scope and knew that our budget was about 20% short of what we needed. And normally you would go back to the owner and say, okay, now we've got to, this isn't going to happen. There's no way. We're going to have to cut scope here. And as a team, everyone took a deep breath and basically made the target cost of the project the amount of money they had to spend, which is a little messed up if you look at the overall terms. But we basically promised that we would build the amount of scope that they needed for the amount of money they had to spend. The other addition to that is they had a group called the Center for Operations Excellence, which was a lean operations group that was working within their organization. They had many Lean Six Sigma black belts that were trying to improve operations. So they wanted our design process to tie immediately to how they were changing operations. We then designed the entire project using full-size mock-ups. Someone donated a warehouse. It was a lovely non-air-conditioned, non-heated warehouse in Ohio that we had week-long meetings where we basically built out of cardboard every single space for every single department that we built. And the powerful thing about that is, oftentimes you're talking to people who have never done a construction project, and we're expecting them to make decisions that are going to affect their near future of their lives with them not understanding what they're making decisions about. And there were oftentimes there were situations where they would okay something, because we would do quick sketches on paper so we could build it for the next day's meetings out of cardboard. And they would walk into the space the next day and go, this is absolutely, what we thought was going to be the perfect operational model is not going to work. It can't work that way. But it's pretty easy to alter cardboard. It's pretty difficult to rip down construction after it's built. And I'm sure everyone's had a situation like that where you finished a project and realized you can't work that way. So the challenges with that were not only cost, but also getting buy-in from the end users that would actually use the facility. We even had parents as part of the design process, so the parents walked through those and made those spaces and made comments. We had our entire IPD big room staff walk through the spaces and make comments to the extent of sometimes they were offering suggestions on design elements that we'd been doing for, decades. We've been detailing a wall a certain way, and they're like, why are you doing this? This is costing. And we ended up saving, thousands of dollars just by simple changes that happened to the design. So, and it's just them looking at it from a different perspective. So overall, the value the owner got is, well, they actually got their building to open. They got to serve their community in a way that they wouldn't have been able to if we would have used a traditional process. They got buy-in from their end users. The end users are actually able to, what they do is their day in the life testing, what they normally do before they open the facility. They were doing it before we had even drawn anything in BIM. They were doing it with a real live mock-up in CAD. They were running through what happens when a child codes, what happens when we need to take a child to surgery, and running through scenarios and making sure that they work. So you get pretty good buy-in from your staff that way. And we were able to do a lot of value adds to that project as well. It accomplished LEED goals. It's going to be LEED Gold. It has all the goals that we set forth in the beginning of the project. So
they got their program and then some for the money they had.
Yes.
And it's an IPD project.
It's an IPD project, yes.
How did it help that it was an IPD project and not just a lean project?
Well, I know there's probably a lot of arguments out there that if we all just say that we're going to work together effectively, we don't need the contract. And to some extent, I buy into that. To another extent, the contract is really great to break down some barriers that we have with traditional contracts, barriers in terms of how we share information, barriers in terms of who's drawing what and who's the best person to come up with a solution. It puts us all on a different level playing field. It enforces good behavior. It discourages bad behavior. I think it was pretty powerful in terms of having everyone on the same page with that project. I don't think really people work towards the monetary rewards necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily a motivator of people. I think people are more motivated by doing a good job, which an IPD also sets that up outside of the monetary rewards. But I think going into that kind of structure, you also get in a situation where you're not going to be penalized for doing good work either, which in a traditional contract structure with a lump sum fee, sometimes you can get into that situation.
Yeah. Okay. Steve, so you've been listening to all this. What threads do you see? What thoughts do you have here?
Yeah, so again, it may not be surprising that learning, right? But let me connect some dots here. So there's some contradictions, right? So something about durability and design. So when you hear that, the conventional wisdom would be durability and design. So that sounds like I make a design decision and it lasts a long time, hence it's durable. But if you hear this narrative, you know, the walkthroughs, the mock-ups, that kind of thing, what it sounds like actually is that there was a lot of alternatives entertained very early on in order to get to that first decision. And you've all been in this situation, I'm sure of it, which is you're under time pressure, you're under cost pressure, you know, the thing has to open by such and such a date. And someone will say, you may have said, well, look, we don't have time to entertain all these alternatives, we don't have time to do all this experimentation because we're under time pressure. And the thing that I want to extract out of this conversation is that it's precisely when you're under all that pressure is exactly when you have to force yourself to pause to do the this high-speed iteration and experimentation. Because you think about the alternative. Let's say you're under no time pressure at all. So you make a decision, you entertain one or two alternatives, not 15 or 20. You start working off that decision, it turns out it's a crummy decision. If you're under absolutely no constraints, no time, no money constraints, so what? You just rip it apart and redo it. But on the other hand, if you're under time and money constraints where you can't afford to rip it out because someone needs it or someone can't pay anymore, all the more reason that you have to go through this very high-speed sketch-up, mock-up, walk-through, on and on and on. And again, I think that's of the conversation we've had so far, that would be the single warning I'd offer, is that there's a huge amount of, I think it's like hardwired in our hormones and our neurology, that when we feel, it's a flee or fight, right? We're under pressure, so we want to act. And it's so counterintuitive to like the reptilian part of our brain that when we're under these pressures, to not act and actually stop and think in a very disciplined experimental fashion. So anyway, when you feel like you have to fight or flee, that's exactly the moment where you have to step back and say, oh, let's think this through and run the tests and the experiments so we can make a decision that has this durability.
Great, thanks. So John, renovations is a huge part of, the biggest part probably in terms of the number of projects of what you're doing. Everything in healthcare is being renovated. The NICU is a new project on top of this little project on top of an ED that's that's continuing to function, right?
Yep.
I don't remember how big that project is. It's bigger than the Leahy project, the McLean project, I mean.
It's 35,000 square feet,
Yeah.
half new, half renovation,
Yeah.
$30 million in round numbers.
So how did you decide that that was going to be a lean project? Well, and what are you seeing already? Because are you in construction?
Yeah,
you
we're
are
in construction.
Okay.
This is a project that Walsh is doing over at the Brigham, and
TRO
Young Brandon is the architect.
Yep.
It's a hairy project because we're building a 4th floor on a 3-story building, and the new structure has to go right down through the building to the foundations, basically, through an operating neonatal intensive care unit. So it's about as hairy as it gets. And obviously the kids, the children in that unit are as sick as any children we would have inside the hospital. So infection control, all of these issues are paramount. I think because of the complication, it just seemed to lend itself to the kind of process that Lean affords during design and construction to work through exactly how we're going to get this done. You know, all things considered, you wouldn't want to be doing this project. You know, it's one of those projects that's kind of crazy. Why are we doing this? You know, there's just too many risks associated with it because of the patient population that you're impacting. But it was the only way and the only space that we could create at the Brigham to expand the NICU. So, you know, the commitment was made, and it's been a very, I was not directly involved in it, but the feedback I've been getting was that it's gone very well, both through the design phase and now into the construction phase. You know, talking about renovate, you know, in my mind, the challenge for renovations, or what size to apply this to, is not so much the dollar value when you get into renovations. It's really the duration of the project. And you know, because we can do some renovation projects very quickly if you're working 24/7, and you know, blast through those things, which we all have to do every once in a while. But if it's a renovation project that has several phases, for instance, you know, we've renovated the emergency department at Mass General 3 or 4 times in the 20+ years I've been in that area. And it's always done in phases, of course, because the ED has to keep operating. And there again, it lends itself to a lean process, because you have to integrate the daily operations of the staff to the design, to the construction phasing, to when you can get in there and do structural work or what have you. And it's as tight a process as you can make. And lean really, the lean process requires you to be very explicit. To do this well, it requires you to be very explicit about what it is you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to accomplish it, you know, what's the best phasing, you know, the CBA process around phasing and other kinds of things. And then obviously the integrated planning with the subcontractors about who's going to do what, when, where, and you know, which 3 trades can I get in there that night to do this work one after the other, and do it as painlessly as possible. So, we haven't applied it to extensive renovation projects, but I don't see why we wouldn't. We just have sort of tested these things on the what I consider to be the easier projects, which are the new construction projects, where we're not, in most cases, not working with existing tenants. But now that we're getting a better handle on it as an owner, and I think our partners in the design and construction and subcontractor field are getting a better handle on these processes too, then I'm feeling like we're ready to tackle some of these multi-phase renovation projects. And that's where we're going to see real advantage.
So Bernita, John said it's sort of not the dollar size of the project, but the duration. Can you talk about, like, how small a project have you done on a lean basis, either new or reno, and what was produced from that?
To some extent, when you get to ask the question, how small is too small for a lean project, once you learn how to do projects in a better way, it's hard to not do them that way. You can't just go, okay, well, I'm gonna do it the old way for this project because it's not big enough. Your mindset changes. You've learned differently. You're going to approach it differently. That's not to say that I would jump in with a full, integrated project delivery with multiple trades involved with a target, with all the extra stuff necessarily on sides. And I'll talk about a couple examples. I had a project several years ago in Washington, D.C. for George Washington University Hospital. We had to basically add about a dozen PACU bays to there and renovate a couple of ORs, actually add 2 ORs, and we couldn't add square footage, we couldn't shut the facility down, and so on and so on and so on. And we had pretty extensive construction schedule because we had so many phases, because we couldn't shut anything down. So a lot of things, we had to do a lot of work at night. There were a lot of small changes. Then you move to another phase, and we had a meeting after we had hired all our trade contractors, and some of the ideas brought specifically by our mechanical trade in terms of how we were going to test the medical gas systems ended up cutting that time in half. So we went from a 24-month schedule to a 12-month schedule, just by phasing it differently, by doing a couple of gembas where we looked above the ceiling. We got the entire team together, figured out everything that was above the ceiling that we didn't know about. We looked at the overall design of the floor and figured out what was the best way to sequence the work so that they could stay operational. I mean, the only way, I think, on that complicated of a renovation project where you need to remain operational, even though it was only a $5 million project, the only way I think to do it and actually save a bunch of time is really with that integrated team. Now, I have a couple of clients where we do, renovation projects. We're just, we're their architect. We do multiple projects for them. And so that doesn't, sometimes when you start an IPD project, if you have to do an IFOA agreement, it might take you months to get through that agreement. But if you have an agreement with a facility and you have the same team doing multiple projects over and over, it doesn't necessitate that months of working through contracts. So I have a couple of project teams like that where we might do a reception desk renovation, and we will still do lean design on a reception desk renovation. We will still do current state, future state. We will still mock it up. But I will not necessarily need to invite the electrical trade contractor to a meeting for that because it's a reception desk renovation. The design process will be similar to if I was doing an entire floor. But instead of maybe a week of meetings every 2 weeks, it would be an hour of meeting. One of my clients is notorious, and they won't even admit it, that they are terrible at making decisions. And they wanted to renovate just an office suite. But it's an office suite for probably the most prestigious physicians that they have, including their chief of staff and their chief of surgery. So we immediately created a pull plan for the design process for that. And we mapped out every single decision they had to make at every single meeting. And that was on every single agenda. And if they couldn't make the decision, we immediately followed up and made a plan in the meeting on when they were going to make that decision.
And they appreciated you this?
They loved it.
Okay.
They actually thanked us several times for the fact that they understood what the outcome of the meeting needed to be, what our goal was. We gave them all the information that they needed, because if they didn't have enough information, knowing they had to make a decision, they would ask for it. And we were able to accomplish that redesign of the relatively small space. We had another, a couple of years before, another office redesign for them, and it took 3 times the amount of time that this project did. And it's really just, they want to make the decisions. They don't want their projects to take a long time. They just didn't have all the information at their fingertips, and they didn't understand why they had to decide a certain thing on a certain date. But I think using these principles in any kind of project will reap huge benefits for clients.
Yeah, to your opening statement, why would you go back to you didn't say it, but I will, a brain dead way of working, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we pit ourselves against each other, we act independent of each other, and it doesn't take more time to do it.
Well, and it's not necessarily a toolkit either, right? If you really think about it, it's a different way to think about things. I don't bring my toolkit. Yes, there are tools that you use, but I'm not going to only take out certain things that make sense in a particular instance. I've actually had people come up to my desk when they were supposed to start on a lean project for the first time, and they're like, okay, what's our standard upcharge for lean projects? We don't have it. And it's, no, actually, you should be able to do them less expensively.
Right. Thanks. So Pete, Turner and Payette got this project out in Waltham for Children's. So what is it it's just kicking off, like literally this week or something like that, right?
It actually hasn't kicked off.
Oh, it hasn't kicked off.
It's about to kick off.
It's about to kick off, okay.
About 10 days, yeah.
Okay. So it hasn't kicked off, but what is it that you anticipate from a lean approach that project, you're going to do on that project that maybe others wouldn't have expected or you haven't done on a lot of projects?
Yeah. You know, I guess the approach there would be in 10 days when we do first meet with Boston Children's. You know, there's what we call in the lean game a conditions of satisfaction session. And I think what's important for us is to get aligned with both the design team and the ownership on what's actually important to them with this project. I think today it's about time. So I'm not saying that because that's the way I used to be, but I think in this case it actually is. It's very important for them to have this facility relatively quickly so they can offload some of their beds in the Longwood area. I think that the adjacency to the existing building is going to be very important to them and how we interface the construction sequence so we don't influence their existing facility. That's probably number 2, but I don't know. With children's, dollars is always important, so where that falls in those 3 and how it programmatically works, I got to understand that first. But I would tell you, Hal, that I think there's no better project for target value design. I mean, the metrics are all over the country. You can set up your 5 or 8 major categories or siloed points of cost, and I don't know why you couldn't achieve an absolutely great dollar value for a program and design that is very, very much acceptable for that job site. I think coupled with that, it is a bed tower, and primarily a bed tower. And I think standardization on that campus will be, something that I think Children's would accept. And I think with standardization comes what we call pre-assembly. So we've been, since the BIM world, I saw Johnny Canastraro in the room, there he is. With BIM came prefabrication. Well, with Lean comes pre-assembly, where not only is it one tradesman that's actually putting together components of their project off-site and bringing it together to the site as a prefabricated piece, you're now bringing assembled pieces to the job site. A complete toilet room, for example, right down to the paint. Racks of mechanical. I'm doing a job at MIT today where all the vertical shafts, or 80% of the vertical shafts, will come, complete right down to, the 1-inch conduit. Controlled, valve, insulated, where literally 3 days later, I'm creating the shaft wall enclosure around that vertical shaft. That's pretty neat. That's innovative, that's saving dollars, but it's also saving a bunch of time. And you look at that process, we drive safety and quality in front of time and dollars with everything we do. Think about quality. Building this thing in a controlled environment, at a workbench. That's pretty cool. That's pretty neat. So, with Children's, I think there's a lot of opportunity for pre-assembly. That it?
Okay.
That's good.
Cool. One last question for the panel, and then we'll take some questions from the audience here. Steve, you said you're married to an architect, and I'm going to quote you. He said, by and large, architects, engineers, and contractors are not active learners throughout design and construction. What is it you see that they could do to begin to inflect that, to begin the change of being active learners from beginning all the way through the commissioning of the building?
Yes, so just want to be clear. I'm not sure exactly that's my quote. I may have agreed to it.
Harsh. I recorded it.
All right. Yeah. So here's what I mean. Again, it gets back to basic tendencies, which is our basic tendency is we want to get to a decision. And the reason we want to get to a decision is we want predictability. Most people are not comfortable with uncertainty, except for when you're in a casino and the adrenaline rush is part of the experience. Right? Most of us want predictability. So it seems that things are going to be predictable, and what's going to occur matches our expectations if we make early commitments. And I think what you've heard from the other panelists with very concrete examples, didn't mean the pun, but concrete examples, is that actually delaying decisions to allow that type of experimentation is necessary to get to the right decision. So it's not just architects and builders who are not active learners. Typically, adults aren't active learners, and it is a whole longer riff on this. But it gets into the basic thing is that most of us get to the point where we are right now because we've gotten the right series of right answers. And people have said, oh, well, you got these answers wrong, so don't keep doing this. You've got these answers right, so continue to do this. And it winnows out until you get to the point that you've accumulated enough strings of right answers, gold stars, A's, 1,600 or 2,400 on the SAT, that you've sort of conditioned yourself to feeling that you always have to have the right answer. And since we all work with healthcare, I mean, where do you see this? The extreme is doctors, right? Because you think about why does most doctors do what they do? Is because they weren't good at other stuff, but they happen to score just the right number of gold stars to become the doctor of that type. And we've all had this, he's laughing over there, so you've had this experience yesterday, right? You try to talk to a doctor and get into a conversation where the doctor may not know, and getting them to admit that fact, forget about it, right? So you have this problem of we socialize ourselves to having not only a comfort, but an absolute need to feel like we have the right answer and a tremendous discomfort for the wrong answer, except learning is predicated on starting with the wrong answer. I mean, why am I learning something? Because I don't know how to do it. So, so the thing about what you've heard up here, and certainly what's characteristic of the few organizations which deliver way more value with speed to market than their counterparts, is that they condition themselves to say, not knowing, and not only is it a good thing, but actually that's exactly where we need to invest our energy. And all these stories of the cardboard mock-ups and walking through sites and building something today and rebuilding it tomorrow, you have to understand behind that is a culture which says, the starting point, today we're going to do something where we don't know the answer, which is why we're making it out of cardboard. And tomorrow we're going to do something and we don't know the right answer, we're going to do it out of cardboard. And that's actually a very hard conversation, the conversation to come to the agreement. We don't know what we're doing, so we have to do something to learn how to do it better. So.
Great. Thanks. Anybody here want to make any last comment on that? So how about questions out there? Kurt. Hi.
This is building on that, and this is, as an organization, are you collecting the decisions that have been made on different projects using choosing by advantages and reviewing those decisions to inform corporate standards that might be applied to multiple projects?
John?
Have you been talking about doing that?
We've been talking about doing that. Anybody who's worked for partners knows that we're a pretty decentralized decision-making system. But that doesn't mean that we don't try and collect best practices. And there are A3s that have been produced for our different projects, and I do my best to get copies of those A3s. And one that Tom at NBBJ and his crew did at the BBF and the Brigham was an evaluation of LED lighting compared to fluorescent and other types of lighting. And at the time, this was a couple of years ago now, I think, Tom, the first cost was more expensive, but the operating costs and life cycle and everything else really pushed it over to LED. So, so now we are pretty much as a standard in installing LED lighting when we're doing renovation. So those are the kinds of things that we learn from, and there's a good body of information through these A3s, if I'm able to collect them all as they are produced, that inform one project to the next. Obviously, they need to be updated over time too. They're not static documents.
If I remember right, I think that was Tom, was a LED study that was first done in Palo Alto Medical Foundation, right? That informed this one or something? Right. Something like that. There's something that happened at NBBJ historically with A3s that led to that. Yeah. Someone else. Rich.
Excuse me. First of all, thank you very much. Great presentation this morning. And I'll be perfectly honest with this. I've spent the better part of my life trying to convince owners, particularly in the context of a difficult institutional project, that GMP is better than bid. And now seeing this migration to lean, oh my gosh, I think I won the argument. but there are still institutions in this region, which I will leave nameless, that still insist on the hard bid process.
Right.
So is that a contradiction really to the lean process? Because to me, as Bernita said, this sort of face value cost versus real cost, a hard bid is a collection of face value costs. Mm-hmm. Where does that really put you? And the whole idea is, can you intermesh the hard bid process into the lean process? I don't think you can, but I'd like to hear your answer. And I'm going to tape record it, and if you go my way, I'm going to use that. But it's still, you know, there are institutions that still insist on that process.
Yeah, Pete, you want to take the first shot at this?
Yeah, you know, I think the most important phase of a project is the pre-construction phase. That's where you provide the most value to the overall outcome of that project. And to put players like you and I in competition to provide a service during pre-construction, you get what you pay for. So for me to say that I'm going to provide that for free, that's just nonsense. You know, and I would say that with all due respect to the ownership in the room, that don't put us in that position. Actually, ask us to provide X, Y, and Z, be very specific on what you want me to do, and then let me competitively bid that process, maybe. So, you know, Rich, I'm with you. I've been all along a fan of, you know, a GMP, and even, you know, a competitive GMP doesn't make sense. It's liar's poker. It's, you know, just not what you should do, I think. You know, I think that in the near future, you know, we've sort of watched IPD. We haven't talked a lot about it today, but IPD started on the West Coast, you know, 5-8 years ago, really out of necessity with code, and sort of came and stopped at the Mississippi. And we've been struggling on this side of the Mississippi to bring it to life. And I think that, you know, we're a parochial little town here, and it's going to be tough to bring IPD into our town. But IPD Light, Design Assist, I mean, we do more Design Assist today than we've ever done. Fantastic. The value that, you know, that collaborative effort, not only between the builder and the design team ownership, but now with the subcontracting marketplace, fantastic. Design Assist, that will, I mean, most say by the end of this decade, Design Assist, which is about 10-15% of total delivery today, will be 30-35%. That's what most say. So that all says, don't go lump sum.
It's a hard conversation to have with owners that I've had to have many times, and there's multiple ways to approach it. First, it's kind of the obvious is, if you're going after hard bid and you want the lowest price, you're getting the lowest price for whatever it is that I decide, through guidance with the owner, is the product that's going to be in your facility. And what you're buying is maybe the lowest price for those products. But that's not to say that what I put in there, because I couldn't possibly do research, not just on, I could maybe get the lowest price or best quality for every product, but I don't know whether or not that product makes the trade behind it increase their labor cost. And I certainly don't know labor costs. And I don't think, unless you start paying architects a whole lot more money, we're never going to understand costs as much as we need to actually produce a set of documents and specifications that's always going to give you the lowest cost. It's just not possible. But if you get a team together that can figure that out, that could, by setting a target cost, agree that they're going to give you a building for the amount of money that you have to spend and promise you even more, you have a much better chance of getting more of a building. So you have that argument, or you have the argument, if your child's going into heart surgery, do you go after the lowest bid? But you want to do that for the facility your child's going to have heart surgery in. So whatever conversation makes you most uncomfortable, which is probably both.
You know, Hal, I'll give you a live example. 2 years ago, we built or were awarded in a lump sum fashion, a lump sum bid game, a project for $138 million. This is outside of New England. This is on the East Coast, though. Just completing the job now. And on bid day, we learned we were $9.2 million cheap to our competition. But we thought we were pretty good. But in the intro to our organization with this lean principle and thought, we said, let's just lean the living heck out of this thing. From target value design within our own organization, not with the design team because it was lump sum. We delivered the project about a month ago, and we delivered it for $10.2 million less than what everybody else did on that bid day. We were forced to go lean. And what it does, and what it says is the lean process for us made us achieve our our misfortunate bid day of $9.2 million. If we didn't have that tool, we probably wouldn't have realized that success. We would have lost money on that job in the lump sum game.
Yeah, I think there's a time and place for lump sum, but I don't practice lump sum. In all the years I've been at Partners, which is over 20 now, I don't think I've awarded a single lump sum bid. And it's partly in belief that you're not aligning the interests of the parties to the best product if you go in lump sum. And at the end of the day, this is all about partnerships. And even if the partnership is just one project, you still are trying to make use of the experience of the CM and the trades that you're bringing on to improve the project in all the different ways that you're able to do that. Lump sum, in my mind, from the owner's perspective, removes those incentives, and obviously whatever benefits accrue, they accrue to the CM side of the team. Right. So it's not the way I do business.
You get the quotes you wanted, Richie? Okay, somebody else?
Great presentation, great panel discussion. But what I'm hearing, and it may not be true, but what I'm hearing is very discrete uses of lean methodology. I'm hearing the construction side, I'm hearing the design side, I'm hearing about development. Do any of you, and I'm probably going to be John, I think Nikki was a prime example to have lean methodologies developed before. Not missing at all. Taking the CM, the SOAP, the designer, the of the existing, seeing what they're doing right, doing the BSM, taking that and applying it to new design. How do we identify the cost and construction methodologies and the understanding of the contractors, people who are there all hours of the day, of what's going on beneath them and how it might impact. That may not be the example, but you guys have some examples of where you use it. Lean grew up, not just in the people.
So Akron really was that. It started with operations, improving operations to improving design through all the way through construction, and then the cycle repeated. So as we were finishing construction, they were still improving operations within the facility. Riley Hospital for Children was the same example. That was a project that started off traditionally, completely stopped, shut down. They hired an IPD team. They hired a consultant to work with the facility in operations. We picked up in operations and design with the entire team, not just the architects. The contractors and trade contractors were all party to the agreement. They were all part of that learning. Oftentimes they were part of the Gembas too, because they needed to understand the systems and how they work together too, and carried that all the way through construction. And then it doesn't stop. Even when we stop meeting with the end users, their improvement doesn't stop. So as the project progresses, if anything changes in operations to the point where it requires a construction change, then we would sit down and have a conversation. Is the return on investment enough to change what's going on in construction? And as a team, we'd decide that, and we'd make alterations as we needed to. And that's other value adds as the project progresses. So I think for the most of the children's projects that I've worked on have been that way, even if we have a client who doesn't ask for lean in design and construction, that we're, okay, this is the way we design projects now. We're going to go to the Gemba, we're going to figure out your current state, we're going to work with you through future state, and that's just how we're going to design your project regardless of whether or not you ask for it.
The Brigham Building for the Future, which Tom, right here in front, NBBJ, has designed and Suffolk is constructing, is lean from the very, very beginning, and will be through the end when we're completed. And you know, the remarkable thing about that project in my mind is that the target value design that was set up, I don't know, 3 years or so ago now, has stuck. And you know, ups and downs, but we're right there. And the scope of that project has evolved fairly significantly during the course of the design and even into the construction. We're adding a floor, for instance. You know, it's not it may sound like a rigid process, and you know, and there are certainly processes and procedures to follow, but that doesn't restrict your ability to operate as a client, which is to make some really crazy decisions sometimes, like adding a floor when you're in construction. And it is absorbed within the lean process with the team that you have working. So, you know, I think that's been a challenging project in many respects. And again, it's not finished, but it's pretty close to being finished, and it's gone very, very well. So we are starting to see full cycle lean projects being delivered. The Assembly Row office building out in Somerville, it's a 900,000 square foot office building, which we are supposed to occupy, not supposed, we will occupy May 1st of next year. Steel just started going up. Is also a lean process beginning to end with Gensler and also with Suffolk. So we're getting the experience from beginning to end.
The challenge that we're seeing is that organizations that are committed to continuing to improve, like hospitals, have to be in that mode right now. We haven't got enough experience yet to anticipate what are the 3 or 4 cycles of improvement that are going to happen after they move in. And when I say cycles, like a 1.5 to 2 year kind of periods where they're improving and responding to what's happening in the economy. We don't know yet. So have the architects figured out how to design for ongoing adaptation? We'll know in a while, but I think maybe we've got some experience on the West Coast because we've done that back 8 years ago. So there may be some lessons learned there, but that's not happened here in Boston yet.
Hal, can I add something to this?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so it's a great question, the discrete versus holistic application to lean. So let me just step back on this and the rhetorical question, why are we talking about lean? And the answer is Toyota, right? Because if you think about it, Toyota, 1960s, no one paid any attention. 1970s, they were sort of an afterthought in the auto market, making these very small, inexpensive cars. And by the 1980s, they caught a whole lot of attention because they had absolutely decimated the big three. And when people started looking at Toyota, they said, oh man, look at this. The reason they're decimating the big three is because on any given day, half the people and half the workspace are making twice the product, and the product is better. So that was manufacturing. And so there was, you know, the seminal articles in the 80s talked about lean manufacturing, lean production, that kind of thing, half in, twice out on any given day. As people started crawling back, though, and adding to the research, they, you know, all right, so let's think about what the answer was. There were all these tools, but the basic essence was standard work, right? Standard work was that a guy's putting a seat in a car, he's got standard work which will guide him to the right way of doing it, and it'll make it much easier to see if he doesn't have the right way, which will then trigger in the Kaizen and the A3 and all that kind of thing. So that was what they were seeing in manufacturing. But then as people started working their way back and said, wait a second, isn't that remarkable? The same approach to managing work, which we thought was only for high volume, low variety, repeatable work, it's not only running the factory, it's actually ramping the factory, you know, model year to model year. And oh, look at that. They take the same approach of this, you know, declaration of what they think is going to work, and then this great attention to see what's not working, not only on ramping a new model, but actually building a new factory. And they're applying it to the design of the factory, and they're applying it to the design of cars. So, you know, half in, twice out. It wasn't just the making of the stuff. You say, well, whatever happened to the Ford Taurus? What happened to the Ford Taurus was the Toyota Camry. That Toyota was introducing new product every 2 years on the Camry platform, and Ford was introducing every 4 years on the Taurus platform. And Taurus, which was this high-flying product, you know, highest seller in its class, boom, it cratered out. So what you see, you know, again, back to the question, why do we talk about lean? It's because Toyota came from nowhere, dominated and destroyed its competitors, and has sustained a lead over its competitors for the better part of 3 decades. And when we say, well, where does Toyota apply this? The answer is everywhere. They apply, you know, way upstream in development and design of product, and the design of process, and the running of the product, running the process of brands, training people. It simply doesn't matter. It's how they do things. And to the question which was asked before, when do you choose between lean and not? It's like, well, when do you choose between doing something well and doing it poorly? Right? Oh, yeah. Well, today, you know, this doesn't matter. I'm going to do it poorly. So anyway, your question on discrete versus holistic is right on. And the encouragement is, if you're doing it here in this discrete point, start testing yourself and pressuring yourself to bring it into areas where it's not so comfortable, but with the confidence that it's comfortable for somebody else. And so it will be comfortable for you with a little bit of practice.
Thank you. Another question. answered all your questions. Well, that's great. So Dan, you want to wrap it up?
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, thank you to all of you, our panel today. I think this has been a great discussion. And thank all of you for coming. And we have to let John Messervy leave the room first because he'll never get out of here. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Steve, nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Really enjoyed it.
Good job.
Thank you.
What you were saying.